There was a time when I woke up tired, even after a full night's sleep. It wasn't the kind of physical exhaustion that goes away with rest. Past the standard kind of exhaustion up in the Buddhas. I would open my eyes in the morning and, even before getting out of bed, I already felt a strange tightness in my chest. As if the day hadn't even started yet, but I was already late for something. As if I already owed something to the world before I had even existed for myself that day. I got up, got ready, met my obligations, answered messages, solved problems, smiled when I was expected to smile, agreed when I disagreed, stayed silent when something inside me wanted to speak. On the outside, everything seemed perfectly normal. On dating At night, when I was finally alone, that hard-to-explain feeling would come. A silent emptiness. It wasn't exactly sadness. It was absence. As if I had spent the entire day being everything for everyone, and nothing for myself. At that time, I didn't know how to name it. I only knew that something inside me was getting lost, even if no one noticed. At what moment did I start living more to please others than to listen to myself? That question didn't arise clearly or rationally. It didn't come as an organized thought. It came as discomfort. It came as irritation for no apparent reason. As a desire to disappear for a few days. As a discomfort that arose when I looked at my own life and thought, am I supposed to feel this way? Why am I so tired? Why does nothing seem enough? For a long time, I pushed those questions away, because stopping to listen to them required courage. And pleasing was still easier than facing the emptiness that appeared when I stayed silent with myself. When I look back, I realize this didn't start suddenly. It was built little by little. From an early age, I learned that being accepted brought rewards. When I behaved well, I was praised. When I didn't complain, I was seen as mature. When I understood everyone, I was considered special. I was the easy child. The one who didn't cause trouble, who understood situations, who adapted. I learned very early that causing fewer problems meant receiving more approval. In adolescence, to belong. I wanted to be accepted. And I realized that when I shaped myself, when I agreed, when didn't set boundaries, I was more liked. Without realizing it, I began to associate my worth with how much I could please, with how useful I could be, with how well I could meet expectations. It wasn't conscious. I didn't wake up thinking, today I'm going to erase myself. It just happened. I asked less about what I felt, and more about what was expected of me. Over time, pleasing stopped being a behavior. It became an identity. On the outside, all of this looked like maturity, empathy, responsibility, strength. But there is a very thin and extremely dangerous line between empathy and self-abandonment. I started saying yes when I wanted to say no. I started swallowing discomfort to avoid conflict. I started minimizing my own needs. I thought, I'll deal with this later. It's not that important. I can handle it. Each concession seemed too small to be a problem. But together, they began to create distance. Distance between who I was and who I showed to the world. I didn't stop existing all at once. I abandoned myself. Little by little. Over time, clear signs began to appear, which I chose to ignore for a long time. I felt guilty when I thought about prioritizing myself. I became extremely anxious, just imagining someone being upset with me. I had difficulty answering simple questions like, what do you want? What do you like? What do you prefer? I confused love with approval. I confused being needed with being important. I confused peace with silence. And the scariest part, All of this had become automatic. My body reacted before I did. I agreed before thinking. I explained myself before being questioned. But there is something no one told me at that time. When we live to please, our essence doesn't disappear. It gets repressed. And everything that is repressed demands space, in some way. The bill came due. I started to feel tired all the time. It didn't matter how much I slept. It didn't matter how much I rested physically. It was a deep emotional exhaustion. I got irritated over small things. I cried without fully understanding why. I felt anxious, even when nothing serious was happening. And that confused me deeply. Because, rationally, my life was fine. I did everything right. I met expectations. I delivered. So why did I feel so empty? The more I ignored that question, the stronger it became. I was seen as strong. The person who endures, who solves things, who understands. And being that person comes at an enormous psychological cost. Because no one asks if you're okay when you've always been okay. You don't allow yourself to fail. You don't allow yourself to need. You don't allow yourself to emotionally rest. You learn to swallow, to endure, to keep going. And when you feel like stopping, you blame yourself. There was an ordinary day. No major events. I was alone, in silence, when a thought crossed me in a different way. I know exactly what others expect from me. But I no longer know what I expect from myself. That sentence kept echoing, and there I understood something painful. I had adapted so much. That I had forgotten myself. That moment can be ignored. Or it can be the beginning of a deep transformation. But no transformation begins without discomfort. Living to make me weak. It made me human. But continuing to ignore who I am, out of fear of disappointing others, was costing me far too much. I wasn't born just to be functional. I was born to be whole. Recognizing that I had forgotten myself wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because awareness, even when it hurts, always comes before change. If this story is touching you, subscribe to the channel. Here, we talk about silent pains that many people live with but can't name. Now, let's continue. For a long time, I thought there was something deeply wrong with me. I watched people say no with a naturalness that seemed almost irresponsible to me. At work, in the family, in relationships. They declined invitations, set boundaries, disagreed, and kept living their lives normally. No one seemed to abandon them. No one seemed to punish them for it. Meanwhile, for me, saying no felt like something huge, disproportionate, dangerous. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was physical. My heart would race before I even formed the sentence. My throat would tighten. My mind would start running in circles. It was as if, by saying no, I was about to break something fragile, as if an invisible structure were about to collapse on me. And the strangest part of all, no one had ever forbidden me to refuse anything. Still, I felt afraid. Why did saying no cause me so much panic? While saying yes slowly destroyed me from the inside. That question began to follow me after I recognized something painful. I had forgotten myself, but that awareness opened another wound. Because if I knew I was erasing myself, why did I keep doing it? Why, even exhausted, even resentful, even aware, did I keep giving in? That question didn't lead me to a simple answer. It led me to memories. Two patterns. Two old wounds I had never connected before. Over time, I realized something fundamental. Most of my yeses didn't come from a conscious choice. They came from fear. I said yes before I even thought. Yes to avoid tension. Yes to avoid discomfort. Yes, to maintain the image of someone easy to deal with. I took pride in being flexible, in being understanding, in being the one who gets it. But behind that, there was something I didn't want to admit. I was afraid of being rejected if I showed limits. Each yes felt like it was protecting something, and each no felt like it threatened everything. At work, this became very clear. I accepted extra tasks, even when I was already overwhelmed. When someone asked if I could take on one more thing, my whole body protested, but my mouth said, of course. I stayed late. I took work home. I replied to messages outside of work hours. And there was always an internal justification. It's just this once. It'll get better later, if I don't do it. They'll think I'm not committed. The problem was that this later never came. I felt more and more tired, but I didn't know how to stop, because stopping meant disappointing someone. And disappointing someone always felt dangerous to me. In my family, the pattern was even older. I was the one who understood, the one who gave in, the one who avoided conflict. Even when something hurt me, I thought, it's not worth bringing up. They didn't mean it. I can handle it. I swallowed discomfort with a polite smile, with silence, with rationalizations, because saying no there felt like ingratitude. It felt like disrespect. It felt like selfishness. And little by little, I learned that my needs always came last. In romantic relationships, this pattern became even more painful. I struggled to express what bothered me, to ask for something, to disagree. I adapted. I reshaped myself. I made myself smaller. When something hurt me, I thought, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe the problem is me. If I say something, I might ruin everything. And so I drifted further and further away from myself. Present in the relationship, absent from myself. What if the person pulls away? What if they're disappointed in me? What if I seem cold? What if I'm being unfair? That inner dialogue was fast, automatic, and cruel. And it almost always ended the same way. I said yes. What I didn't realize was that this conversation didn't come from the present. It came from long before. When I began to look at my history more honestly, something became clear. My fear of saying no was not born in adulthood. It was learned. Early on, I realized that affection was conditional on my behavior. When I pleased others, there was warmth. When I disagreed, there was distance, even if subtle. Sometimes it was silence. Sometimes it was disappointment in a look. Sometimes it was an apparently simple sentence. You don't need to be like that. That's not nice. I expected more from you. My emotional system learned quickly. Disagreeing has a cost. So I adapted, again and again. Over time, this pattern began to take its toll. I accumulated resentment, but I didn't know toward whom, because deep down, I knew it was always me who gave in. I felt weak, incoherent, trapped by other people's expectations. But mostly, trapped by the expectation I created for myself of always being available. This created a constant inner conflict, a feeling of living against myself. Being a woman made everything heavier. From an early age, we are taught to care, to understand, to give in. Being firm is seen as harsh. Setting boundaries is confused with coldness. I felt guilty just for thinking about prioritizing myself, as if choosing myself automatically meant hurting someone. That guilt kept me trapped, silent. Adapted. The first conscious no I said was simple. But for me, it was enormous. Before speaking, my whole body trembled. My mind anticipated rejection. My heart raced, but I said it. And the world didn't end. The person was frustrated. But they didn't abandon me. The relationship didn't end. And for the first time, I felt something new, relief, a strange relief. Mixed with fear, but real. That's when I understood something fundamental. My fear was much bigger than reality. That didn't mean everything changed overnight. I still relapsed. I still said yes when I wanted to say no. I still felt guilty after setting boundaries. But something had changed. I noticed, and awareness changes everything. Each relapse became an opportunity for consciousness, not punishment. Saying no didn't turn me into a bad person. It turned me into a more honest one. I learned that boundaries don't push away those who truly love us. They simply reveal those who were only close because of our availability. I also learned that every no to someone else was a yes to myself. And that began to change my relationship with myself. If this part of the story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. Here, we talk about identity, boundaries, and emotional rebuilding. As our story unfolds, I'll talk about something even deeper, the fear of disappointing others, and how it shaped my entire life. There was a day when I heard myself apologizing for existing. It wasn't for a mistake. It wasn't for being late. It wasn't for something I had done wrong. It was just for being there. In that moment, something inside me froze. It wasn't an immediate shock, the kind that makes your heart race. It was slower, deeper, as if an old truth had finally found space to rise to the surface. I realized that apologizing had become automatic, a reflex. A silent way of taking up less space in the world. And that frightened me more than any conflict I had ever avoided. When did I learn that taking up space required an apology? That question didn't come as a clear thought. It came as a persistent unease, a discomfort that wouldn't go away. Because the more I observed my own life, the more evident something difficult to admit became. The fear of disappointing others wasn't just a personality trait. It was the central axis of my decisions. For a long time, I believed that pleasing others was a virtue. I saw myself as empathetic, understanding, flexible. Someone easy to deal with. I liked being told I was calm, mature, balanced. Those compliments worked as a silent confirmation that I was doing everything right. But there was something I didn't want to see. I wasn't just empathetic. I was hyper-adaptable. I adjusted my tone of voice, depending on who was in front of me. I thought 2, 3, 4 times before disagreeing. I swallowed entire opinions just to avoid a slightly awkward atmosphere. I didn't ask, "What do I feel?" I asked, "What do they expect from me right now?" And without realizing it, pleasing stopped being a behavior. It became an identity. This didn't show up only in big decisions. On the contrary, it hid in the smallest, almost invisible things. When choosing a restaurant, I said, "Anywhere is fine." In conversations, I agreed before I even thought. When something bothered me, I told myself it wasn't that important. And little by little, I trained myself not to feel clearly, because feeling clearly could lead me to disagree. Disagreeing could create conflict. And conflict, to me, always felt far too dangerous. In the professional environment, this intensified quietly. I was responsible, organized, always available. The one who fixed things, the one everyone trusted. From the outside, it looked like success. But inside, I lived in a constant state of alert. I accepted demands that exceeded my limits. I answered messages outside of work hours. I took on responsibilities that weren't mine. Not because I wanted to grow, but because I was afraid of disappointing. Saying I can't right now felt risky. Asking for help felt like weakness. Setting boundaries felt like arrogance. So I did more, always more. And every compliment reinforced the same internal logic. If I keep pleasing, I stay safe. I remember a specific situation at work. A last-minute request with an impossible deadline. I felt the exhaustion in my body immediately. I wanted to say it wasn't doable. I wanted to explain that I was already overwhelmed. But before I even spoke, my mind took over. It's not that serious. You can handle it. Don't cause trouble. And I accepted. I left that conversation with a polite smile on my face and a knot in my stomach. Wordlachi. I slept poorly. And the next day, I did it all again. It wasn't an isolated episode. It was a pattern. In romantic relationships, the fear of disappointing went even deeper. I was afraid of seeming demanding, afraid of being a burden, afraid of asking for too much. So I adjusted. I accepted less attention than I needed, less presence than I wanted, less care than I deserved. And I told myself it was fine, that I was mature enough to understand. But deep down I knew, it was fear. Fear that if I showed my needs, I would stop being loved. While I silenced myself emotionally, my body began to speak. Constant exhaustion, tension in my shoulders. A feeling of always being on, even during moments of rest. I slept, but I didn't rest. I stopped, but I didn't relax. It was as if I were always ready to react, to please, to adjust, and that slowly emptied me. The turning point didn't come through a major event. It came through a seemingly trivial detail. I was in a simple conversation, agreeing with something that made no sense to me. I smiled. I nodded. I said, sure, but inside, I felt a strange emptiness. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was an uncomfortable silence. In that moment, something organized itself within me. I wasn't truly living. I was managing expectations. When I began to look at my history more honestly, I realized this didn't come out of nowhere. In many moments of my life, pleasing others was a survival strategy. Being nice avoided conflict. Being understanding avoided rejection. Being easy avoided abandonment. My emotional system learned early that being accepted required adaptation. And I carried that logic into adulthood without ever questioning it. There is a silent trap in being liked by everyone. It creates a sense of belonging, but it comes at a high cost. Because the more I tried to please, the less I knew who I was. My desires became confused, my wants silent, my needs postponed. I existed, but I didn't prioritize myself. The hardest moment was admitting something to myself. I was afraid of disappointing because I associated it with losing love. If someone was frustrated with me, I felt there was something wrong with me. As if I needed to fix it, compensate, make up for it. That belief kept me trapped. There came a moment when I had to say no. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't aggressive. It was conscious. My heart raced. My mind created catastrophic scenarios. My body went into full alert. Even so, I held my ground. There was silence. There was discomfort. There was a shift in the atmosphere. But something unexpected happened. I remained whole. That's when I understood something fundamental. Disappointing others didn't destroy me. What destroyed me was abandoning myself to avoid it. Being honest with myself didn't make me selfish. Majimi heao. The fear of disappointing shaped many choices in my life. But today I know, pleasing all the time isn't maturity. It's fear disguised as virtue. I still feel hesitant sometimes. But now, I choose to listen to myself. And that changed everything. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. Here, we talk about identity, boundaries, and emotional courage. In the final part of our story, I'll talk about the decisive moment, when I had to choose between continuing to be accepted or finally being myself. There comes a moment in life when continuing the same way starts to hurt more than changing. For me, that moment didn't come as an explosion. It came as deep exhaustion, a quiet burnout. A constant feeling that, even while doing everything right, something inside me was being slowly drained. I wasn't in crisis. I was functioning. And maybe that was the most dangerous sign of all. Because when you function too well, no one notices that you're losing yourself. Even you. What happens when you spend so much time pleasing others that you no longer know who you are without it? That question began to surface at the most unexpected moments in the shower. Before falling asleep, in the silence, after a full day. It didn't come as a clear sentence, but as a discomfort that was hard to ignore. Because once I saw how much I abandoned myself to be accepted, I could no longer pretend I didn't know. After the first no, and the realization that I survived, something shifted permanently inside me. It wasn't immediately freeing. It wasn't light. It wasn't empowering, the way many stories make it seem. It was uncomfortable. I began to see every everyday situation as a mirror. Every request, every external expectation, every loaded silence brought the same internal question: am I going to abandon myself again? Or am I going to respect myself? And that question didn't come without a cost. It came accompanied by anxiety, guilt, and fear. Many times, I almost went back on my words. I almost sent messages over-explaining myself. I almost apologized for setting boundaries. I almost softened my words so I wouldn't seem too firm. Because pleasing was familiar. It was known. It was the place where I had always known how to survive. Being myself, at that moment, still felt unstable. Like walking without support after years of leaning on others. Guilt was the most persistent feeling in that process. Not real guilt for having hurt someone, but that diffuse, irrational guilt that appears when you start putting yourself first after years of putting yourself last. I felt selfish for resting, ungrateful for saying no, cold for not giving in. It took time for me to understand something essential. Guilt doesn't always signal wrongdoing. Often, it simply signals a change in pattern. There was a specific moment that made everything very clear to me. Someone close to me asked for something that, under other circumstances, I would have accepted automatically. My body reacted before my mind. My heart raced. My mouth almost said, "Of course." But this time, I paused. I took a deep breath. I felt the discomfort in my chest. And I said, calmly, "I can't." There was no argument. There was no emotional explosion. But there was silence. And that silence seemed to scream everything that wasn't said. After the conversation ended, fear hit with full force. Fear of having been harsh. Fear of disappointing. Fear of being less loved because of it. My mind began to create narratives. You overreacted. You could have tried. You'll regret this. For a few minutes, I almost gave in, almost went back. Almost explained myself too much, but something different happened this time. I stayed. I stayed with the discomfort. With the doubt. With the insecurity. I didn't rush to fix the atmosphere. I didn't try to soften the situation. I didn't shrink myself to be accepted. For the first time, I remained with myself. And that was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Not everything was easy after that. Some people drifted away. Others reacted with confusion. Some tried to make me feel guilty for having changed, and there were moments of loneliness. Moments when I wondered if I had made the right choice. If it wouldn't be simpler to go back to pleasing, to go back to being the comfortable version of myself. But even in those moments, something was different. I was no longer empty. The rebuilding didn't happen all at once. It happened through small choices, listening to my exhaustion, respecting my physical limits, saying I'll think about it before saying yes. I began to observe my reactions more carefully, to identify when an action came from fear and when it came from genuine care. The question that started to guide me was simple, but powerful. Does this come from love or from fear? Something curious happened over time. Some relationships dissolved, but others grew stronger. The ones that stayed were different, more honest, less based on expectation and more on presence. I began to realize that those who only accepted me when I erased myself didn't accept who I truly was, and that realization hurt. But it also set me free. There was grief in this process. Grief for the woman who tried to please all the time, who believed she had to earn love, who confused acceptance with adaptation. I had to look at that version of myself with compassion. She wasn't wrong. She was trying to survive. But I no longer needed to live that way. Over time, something began to reorganize inside me. Love stopped meaning constant effort. Belonging stopped requiring silence. Acceptance stopped depending on performance. I learned that boundaries don't push away those who truly love us. They simply reveal who was there for convenience. My life didn't become perfect. Conflicts still exist. Fear still appears. Sometimes, the urge to please still shows up. But now, I recognize it. Today, I know that being accepted cannot cost me who I am, that love doesn't require self-abandonment. That presence is worth more than approval. If you live to please, you might think you're being strong. You might think you're being mature. You might be being good. But living to please, deep down, is living in fear. And you don't need to live like that anymore. Being yourself may cost some expectations, but it gives you something infinitely more valuable, your own life. If this story spoke to you, subscribe to the channel. Here, we talk about identity, boundaries, and emotional courage without masks. Share this video with someone who always puts themselves last. And most importantly, remember, you were not born to please the world. You were born to exist whole.